Hello everybody. Today we are going to learn how to make a PC. This is going to be a kind of a parody of sorts on the Verge PC tutorial build that you've probably seen at one point. And this is going to be more informative than that. I'm going to do my best not to give any false information. And we're going to use some pretty, ghetto PC parts to kind of show that you can make do with anything you can get your hands on, within reason, of course. So, first things first, we gotta think about the case. Where are we gonna get a case? That's your case. You don't need to make it fancy. The only thing you really need, honestly, is just something to turn it on. You need a power button. I didn't get one, but we can deal with that problem as well. We don't need to worry about that. The only thing a case serves is just to protect your PC from dust. And probably, give it proper ventilation, add a couple of USB ports to the front, but that's about it. It's pretty basic. You can make it yourself, 3D print it, make it out of wood, make it out of a stuffed beaver, I don't care. It doesn't matter. You don't need to go and get yourself one of those RGB gaming PC cases. That's just fluff. And honestly, that money can be spent elsewhere, like getting better parts. So, what's next? Well. The first thing you need is to know what motherboard you have, or what motherboard you're going to get. So here's a motherboard I had from pre-built. It's an FM2 socket motherboard. Here's what it looks like up close, and in all honesty, I don't like this motherboard. That pre-built that it came in was honestly not that good, and neither was the CPU. But coincidentally, that CPU was one of the highest tiers you could get for this series of motherboards. Let me explain why. So, if you want to get get a fast PC, you gotta have a solid foundation. Motherboard is that foundation. Now, in order to have a proper CPU, that motherboard must be able to support that CPU. And this is an AMD specific motherboard, and if you want to get an Intel CPU, you have to have an Intel specific motherboard. And of course, besides that, there are generations. As time goes on, there's going to be a new generation for each sets of CPUs. Intel is notorious for just making a new series of motherboards every 1 or 2 years, or sometimes within the same generation they might even release a new motherboard that outclasses the other one and make certain series of CPUs exclusive to that series of motherboards. This was from AMD's dark ages, where they couldn't compete with Intel. This is supposed to be like their budget competitor motherboard of sorts. And as a result, this FM2 socket series, which is meant for their budget / maybe mid-tier, like low mid-tier type of series, the highest performing CPU this accepts is an AMD A10 6800, and what I'm going to be putting here today is the AMD A10 6700. The difference between the two is that the 6700 is a bit slower, but it takes a lot less power. So to summarize, you want a good motherboard because, for the sake when it comes to CPUs, you want to be able to have something that will be able to actually use the CPU in question, and if you can't, well, what's the point? There are things such as overclocking features that will vary depending on the motherboard, and there's other things I like to point out, like a motherboard can have different amounts of RAM sets. RAM slots. This only has 2, so you can only have 2 sticks of RAM. So if you one day say, I want to have 8 gigs of RAM and upgrade later to the future to 16, it would have been easier if this had 4 slots, because then you could say, well, I'll get I think what's called a 2x4. So you get 2 4-gig sticks and you put it in, you get 8 gigs, you're running it in dual channel, and then if you later on when you want to get to 16, you can get another 2x4 and get it up to 16. And this way it would be a cheaper upgrade path, and you'd be able to take advantage of this thing called dual channel RAM, and that kind of makes things a bit faster. This only has 2, so your only option would be to, if you wanted to go like a 8 gig to 16 gig or 4 gig to 8 gig, you'd have to get a 1 4 gig stick or a 1 8 gig stick, and then later upgrade to get another RAM stick just like that. This is a PCI Express slot. I don't know what type. It's probably like, yeah, it's PCI Express 16. It says it in the text right there. And there's another small PCI spot that's being occupied by this Wi-Fi card. They call it mini PCI, and this is only X1. The differences is kind of like, it's basically bandwidth, but to simplify it even further, think about pipes, okay? If you have a small pipe, you can only send a little bit of water. If you have a big pipe, you can send a lot of water. X16 is like 16 times the water. Let's see what else. And other things to think about is that your PCI Express card is going to be where you'd put a graphics card if you had one, and or some other device, maybe like a RAM disk. Like there was a PCI card, you put it here and you put like a bunch of sticks of RAM, and you just have that as your hard drive, but I wouldn't recommend that. This here is a 4-pin connector in case your graphics card cannot just be powered by the PCI slot. And this is honestly not good. If you even think about getting anything high-end for your graphics card, and the PCI Express slot is not enough, 4-pin probably won't be enough either. It probably won't be enough either. And yeah, this smaller motherboard has 4 USB 2.0 sticks, 2 more over here, a VGA slot, and an HDMI slot. Oh, one other thing to keep in mind. Let's say you want to get a Ryzen motherboard, alright? I know it seems like I'm bloating this, but this is a bit more relevant for right now. Or even an Intel motherboard. And just because you have these video outputs does not mean that the CPU has an integrated graphics. It has integrated graphics. It might not. For instance, Ryzen 3 1200, Ryzen 5 3600. In fact, anything that doesn't have a G, like it's not like any processor that doesn't have a G next to it in these new Ryzen CPUs, it does not have integrated graphics. You need a dedicated graphics card. Keep that in mind. So, for instance, Ryzen 3 3200G that has integrated graphics. Intel, on the other hand, more of them have integrated graphics, but they're worse than AMD's. And to top it off, if you want to know what the ones that don't have integrated graphics are, I think it's the Intel F. Like if you says like Intel i5 10400F. That's the one without the integrated graphics. Okay, enough of this. Maybe I'll talk about it later as we go on. So where are we gonna put this motherboard? Now just throw it in here, man. I got this door. Hopefully that doesn't break. We'll just place it here. The mounting, man, I'm not even gonna do anything about that. Okay, so here's our DDR3 RAM stick. The one good thing the FM2 series of sockets had is that they supported DDR3 RAM up into 2133 megahertz, which is that's the highest end you can get for the DDR3 generation of RAM, or one of the or not the highest, but it was pretty high. A lot of motherboards and laptops, they usually only went to 1600 or 1066 even. But this goes to 2133, although there are even higher overclocked RAM sticks apparently that have been able to go higher. This one is an 8GB, 1866 megahertz RAM stick from Samsung. And one other thing, when you're getting RAM, this DDR stuff matters, okay? If you cannot put a DDR2 stick into a DDR3 slot, you can't put a DDR4 stick into a DDR3 slot, and vice versa for any combination you can think of. If it's DDR3, it has to be in a DDR3 slot. There's no converter or adapter. The only adapters exist is for if you want to put maybe laptop RAM into a desktop motherboard. I've seen that. Those exist. I haven't had any experience with it myself, but that's the only converter I know of or adapter I know of. In fact, it's not an issue of you stick it in and you try and turn on the computer and say, oh, it's not working. It's an issue of the fact that the RAM stick will literally not fit. So at least the comforting thing about this is if someone tries to sell you RAM and it's like not the good stuff, well, you'll at least be comforted that it'll probably be the same generation as advertised. So he says it's DDR4 4200 megahertz, and you stick it in and it actually fits, then you have the comfort that it's probably at the worst 2400 megahertz DDR4 RAM. Because otherwise, if it wasn't DDR4 RAM, it wouldn't fit. So let me show you what that looks like when you want to put it in. This gap right here, this tooth gap, is how it indicates the orientation of the RAM stick you want to put in. Oh yeah, probably want to release those. And when you put it in, there should be a distinct snapping sound. Don't press too hard, but don't be afraid of pressing a bit more firmly. Alright, cool. You see that automatically snapped in. So the RAM is installed. Let's see what else do I have in this box of variety Doritos. Alright. So, here's the CPU. Now to add a little bit more onto that subject of the CPUs and motherboards. So you might have a CPU that is the same socket as the motherboard. That does not automatically mean it's compatible. For instance, and as of this video, the recent stuff that's happening is that there are those 5000 series Ryzen CPUs. Those are still on an AM4 socket. It'll be the last of their kind, the last AM4 CPUs to exist. Those will not work on an A320M motherboard. They're not supposed to. If you manage to get them to work, then that's one thing. Like, I've heard you can maybe modify the BIOS and do some trickery to get it to work. That's not there though. However, that's not supposed to happen. They're not officially supported. If you want to try and save money and you already have an A320M board, it doesn't, and you don't mind for doing a bit of waiting and just doing a bit of trial and error, maybe you could try to buy the 5000 series CPU, put it on that 8320M. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, well, tough luck. You have to buy the appropriate motherboard series, just as the 400 or 500 series. But yeah, just because the socket fit, just because it fits, does not mean it'll work. This is true as well for Intel, which has this problem a lot more than AMD does. So, this also has a specific orientation, and this one does not have any pressing involved whatsoever. It should just like kind of drop in if you do this right. So let's see. There's a faint grooving that's a bit more distinct in the other places, and it's supposed to match with these parts that don't have pins. So I think I have it backwards or something. I see. Let's try that. Alright, cool, it fit. And once it fits, you gotta lock it in with this latch. And bam. We're not done installing the CPU yet. There's one other thing we have to do. And this is that one thing that the Verge guy completely messed up, alright? We need to apply some thermal paste. So this is the fan. We'll need that. I wonder if I dropped it on the ground. It was underneath the case. Well, here's the cap. Alright, so you want to be very, very frugal with your thermal paste. In fact, it might be better to not even put any at all than to overdo it. I'm not, you always want to have a little bit. You want to have some thermal paste. But you really, really, really don't want to overdo it. You can cause problems. Depending on the motherboard or whatever, if it just starts spreading everywhere. You just put a small P. Maybe there's some techniques they say you can put an X. You can put a big, just big dot. I'm gonna just put a little bit right here. Alright, so you see that? And if I messed up a bit, it's kind of spread over, but it's a thin strand, so whatever. This much I think is okay, because when we're going to press the heatsink on the CPU, and the force of that will spread this thermal paste all over. Let's put a little more. Let's put a little more. Alright. That's enough. That's enough. We really overdoing it now. Okay, so this is a part I might not be able to record well, but the one thing I like about this cooling business is that, as far as I know, it shouldn't matter too much where you get your cooling fan, or what era or generation it came from. Some cooling fans, if they have the right pin, people have been using them for 9 to 10 years across motherboards and PC builds. Some people have probably gone on for longer. This is a Wraith cooler, Wraith Stealth cooler, whatever it's called, that got bundled into one of my previous purchases, the Ryzen 3 1200. When I upgraded to the Ryzen 5 3600, I had a spare of this. The reason I didn't like this build that I had before, this pre-built, is because the problem was that it kept saying, "Oh, it didn't turn on properly. It didn't turn on properly. It sometimes took like 30 minutes just to show up into the BIOS, and that was strange. And obviously, Geek Squad never figured it out. That was the worst waste of money I ever spent. I could have spent that on V-Bucks, and I probably would have been happier, or some other microtransaction garbage from a game I don't even like. That would have been a better purchase. Maybe like a bunch of McDonald's. I don't know. So, and one time, it was only because of this one time I tried turning on that PC that the BIOS finally gave an error message saying that your CPU fan is messed up. And that made me click because I had replaced every component conceivable besides, of course, the motherboard and CPU itself. I changed the RAM. I changed the graphics card. I thought maybe it was a graphics card since it was like the integrated graphics being bad, since it kept showing blank screens instead of the BIOS or any sort of video signal. I thought maybe it was the power supply, and I changed the power supply. So when none of those work, I said, I better get rid of this. Well, anyways, let's see. So this has a 4-pin connection. We gotta find somewhere on this motherboard where it has 4 pins. Okay, cool. See, this was the one thing they did right is they actually labeled everything. We have this 4-pin connection for CPU fan. So we want to connect it, we're going to put it here. This wire is going to go there. As for how we're going to screw this is probably the only screwing I'm actually going to do with this. Because, well, I don't feel like drilling holes into this case yet. When it's oriented like that and it seems like it'll fit, we're just going to have to put some pressure on it. And, yeah, let's see what happens. Or maybe it is a proprietary cooler. I have no idea. I'm gonna try. It looks like it'll almost fit though. But the holes look too big. How do you know if the screw will get down there? You know what? I'm gonna skip this step. I'm gonna I'll just plug it in, and we'll see what happens. You take. All right, cool. Maybe I just messed up or something, but no matter how I oriented this, it just really feels like even if I press really hard, it wouldn't, this wouldn't even fit. Or maybe I'll cut the video and try doing it later, but I'm gonna add the rest of the parts first and then think about this for a bit. Yeah, let me cut the video first. I want to try something. Okay, so as you can see, even though the CPU fan, as the CPU fan's connector will connect to the motherboard, it won't actually line up with the holes here, so it looks like I was wrong about that. But I'm pretty sure it's gonna work anyways. It just means that, well, since there's not gonna be as much pressure on the CPU as if it was actually screwed down, then you can say goodbye to a lot of the cooling properly. But you know what? That's fine. That's fine. We're just trying to get this to work, right? We're just trying to piece together something to yeah, we're just trying to piece something together. Don't worry about it. Alright, so next thing we gotta think about is the hard drive. Where are you gonna store your operating system? So this connects with a SATA connector, and you're gonna need for a hard drive with a SATA connector, this is the cable you're going to need in order to send for the actual data transfer between the motherboard and the hard drive. This other hole that you see here, so when I plug this in, hold on a second. Yeah. When you plug this in, you see there's another slot here. What's this for? This is for the power. This is going to connect to the power supply that we have. But first, let's just connect this to the motherboard. So, over here, we see there are 2 available ports. And there's probably another one somewhere. But never mind. They did the bare minimum. So one was for the DVD player and one was for the hard drive. And they did not put any room for you to expand. If you wanted to upgrade, you had to either take one out, take the DVD drive out, or you had to just replace your hard drive. Which that kind of sucks, but hey, that's what you get for buying pre-builts. So we're going to connect this This cable is gonna go into one of these two. Alright, great. Now that we have the hard drive, the motherboard, and the CPU and the CPU fan all connected, and of course the RAM is in place, there is one last thing to do, and that's the power supply. So the part that the most important part when it comes to the getting your PC to work is this 24 pin port, or whatever it's called. If you want to make sure that your power supply is of any use at all, you better hope that it has one of these connectors, because if it doesn't, well, you're out of luck. So the reason I brought that up, by the way, is that there are some power supplies, for instance, called Pico power supplies. They only supply up to 150 watts. And I bet that in those cases, they're not meant for these more standard motherboards. They probably would have a different type of connector. Some power supplies have proprietary connectors that they can't connect to other motherboards, or some motherboards will only take proprietary, and vice versa. So it's not a question of, oh, you can just take any power supply and connect it. You have to make sure that what you have is going to fit. And so in this case, this is the power supply that came with a computer, and its supply is, I don't know, 280 watts. It says 350 on it, but another thing to consider is that when you're when you're gonna buy a power supply, one thing to make sure is that you're buying, like, you're getting something that you know the sustained wattage of. So when it says 350, that is not 350 watts sustained, that is 350 watts peak. In this case, that was 350 watts peak. That is not 350 watts sustained. When a power supply says 700 watts, it is better to assume that's saying something like 550 or 600, especially since they have these things about efficiency. Like a good power supply is usually the lower end decent power supplies are like 80% efficient or something like that. And if you pay more, it'll be 90%. And as obviously there's nothing going to be 100% efficient. That doesn't exist. So keep that in mind. If you're trying to install a graphics card and it says it needs, I don't know, 100 watts of power, your power supply says 350 watts, and you're using already 200 watts, well, that might be cutting it close. You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. Don't do that. And in some cases, besides the fact that, so on one hand you have the amount of power that the power supply says it will provide, which is questionable. You also have the amount of power that the graphics card says it'll take, which is also questionable because it might take more power than it actually is. In this one video, there was that guy, Linus Tech6. I mentioned him again. I'm recording this part of the video on a different date, so it's been like a billion years. But the guy took two RTX 3090s. He did the SLI, and even though in theory the power supply he was using was enough to supply the cards, when he was stressing them out, he actually made the computer shut off because the graphics cards peaked in power consumption, and during that peak, it actually drew more power than the power supply was able to actually deliver. So keep that in mind. And this applies to CPUs as well. When CPUs say, like Intel says 65 watt TDP or AMD says 65 watt TDP, it can be more, especially if you're overclocking or maybe even through normal power consumption. It will take more than what they say. Like in Intel's case, what I've heard is that the TDP is for base clock, so they say this is a 3 gigahertz CPU and it boosts to 4.5 gigahertz. That 65 watt is for when it's only doing 3 gigahertz, not when it's doing 4.5 gigahertz. So that is also something to consider. When it comes to power consumption, the main things that will draw the power are CPU and GPU. If you have a lot of hard drives, like you got a motherboard that takes up 6 hard drives, then yeah, that might also be a source of power to worry about. But not so much SSDs. And when I mention hard drives, one thing I'd like to mention is that this SATA connector, it applies for, it's popular in hard drives, DVD/Blu-ray players, and certain types of SSDs. And in the case of SSDs, not all SSDs are the same. Some use that M.2 slot, while others have used the normal SATA connector. And if you ask me, and you want to ask me something about SSDs, don't ask me. All the general idea is that they're going to be much faster than the hard drives, but fast is fast. But for the people who really, really care, ask someone who actually uses them or has experience with them about, in practice, how much of a difference it'll make. To me, what I'm perceiving from my small amounts of experience with SSDs is that, okay, you're going to boot Windows 10 in like 10 seconds instead of 10 minutes. You get it? But yeah. Anyways, so we got the power supply connected to the motherboard. Now we gotta connect the power supply to the hard drive, because that SATA connector, think about it, this SATA connector is not going to have deliver enough power, even if it did deliver power. Like, I imagine it doesn't, we're just gonna assume it doesn't deliver power. Let's just leave it at that. I was going to talk about how I have this SATA to USB connector, and that for 2.5 inch drives, the power over USB 3 was enough, but for 3.5 inch drives like this, you still need to connect it to a wall outlet. But just the hard drives are significantly power hungry, just not as much as CPUs or GPUs or anything like that. Remember, there are spinning. There's discs in here that are spinning pretty fast. They need their power. So that's what that other connector is for. Alright, we've got that connected, and now peripherals. Yeah, peripherals. So here's some USB keyboard. We're just connect it in from the side or whatever. Here's some mouse, USB 2.0 mouse. Connected the same way through the motherboard's USB ports. And yeah, I'm gonna just close this. There's a wire that we need for the power supply, so I'll be back with that. I've got some cheap power strip over here. Connector is going to be connected in the back, and you're going to need one of these wires, most likely, to connect to your power supply. If your power supply doesn't come with one, you got ripped off, but the head looks like this on one side, obviously a US plug on the other. Oh yeah, one other thing I'd like to mention is that I did not include a power button for this. We're not going to need a power button for this. But of course, before we get to that, look at this beautiful monitor. This is what we're going to get our signal through. This is the one that's going to display the glorious 720p super high definition display. This is where we're going to see all our graphics, the Windows logo, if we get that far. Well, you know. So yeah. Power that on though. This monitor accepts the good old, grand old VGA connectors, so the VGA output used in the IBM PC compatibles since the 1980s, which back then used to boast a whopping 4 to 16 colors, or even monochrome. Okay. What the heck? Oh. Alright. So. Coincidentally, this monitor and many other monitors, at least from this era up to some time from now, use the same exact cable. So now I do have a monitor that does not use this standard, but that's fine. I'm just saying that you're lucky if you get it to accept this, because, well, let's say you don't like this monitor anymore and you get a new one, and I don't know, you lost the cable for that, or some guy cut that cable and the monitor came, either the cable that came with the monitor got cut, you can still use this. Like, this is obviously not the same color scheme as this, but I don't even know where the original for this one is, but it'll work, so it'll work. It fits, it works. A lot of computing has kind of been simplified to that. Does it fit? It will probably work. Except for CPUs to an extent, as we discussed. Alright. So, I'm gonna treat you guys to a trick. There's a trick I learned a while back regarding turning your computer on when you don't have a power button. So we open this. And there should be some pins somewhere that say the word power on them. I don't remember where they are, so let's look for them. That doesn't sound good. Alright. Okay, I think I see it. And the reason I'm not thinking about besides the fact that, actually, yeah, let me show it to you guys. I can do that. So. It should be one of the pins here. And let's see. I'm just gonna jab the screwdriver in multiple places until I start seeing this thing hiss. So let's go. So let's put it back right here and start jabbing, because I'm afraid this will start falling off. This hard drive, there's no, yeah. That didn't work. There should be a somewhere else then. Should be here somewhere else. And before I broke it before, that'd be funny. Alright, I'm gonna disconnect the video for a bit. Okay. So this computer has a different place we gotta jam the screwdriver in. But one problem I've noticed is that even when this still, despite the fact that I've replaced the fan, still has this issue of not turning on until it turns on, but you don't even get a BIOS out of it. So this has kind of been an epic failure in one way. It's getting the same symptoms I had even with a different CPU fan, and different hard drive. The power supply doesn't matter. None of this matters. But it probably functions the same as it did last time that I had this computer with different set of parts. So I'm gonna turn it on right now. And we're gonna go over here, and you're gonna look at this monitor, and you're gonna say no signal, as just same as it ever was. And I don't know what to say about this. I was hoping that maybe it really was a CPU fan, but looks like the BIOS was wrong about that as well. And it doesn't matter which of these two pins that I plugged this wire into. Doesn't matter. The fan's obviously spinning. You can hear the hard drive when I place my hand on it, the hard drive spinning. And I did see the keyboard light up one time that I turned this on, but we're not even getting a BIOS. Like, clearly this is connected. It's tight, and it's connected to the VGA port over there, and there's nothing connection wise wrong with that. Go on this monitor, you won't get a signal, and that sucks. That really does. I'm gonna wait for like a billion years of it just having this run, and if I don't get a BIOS or Windows screen or anything like that, then I'm going to upload this anyways, but it's gonna be a failure, and that's kind of cringe. But yeah, alright, see you.